You're great.
Oh, thank you. So
You
are
are.
you.
You're great.
So let's talk about your castmates on Who's the Boss.
Okay.
We've been talking about Tony, and
Yes.
he was also an executive producer on the show.
Yeah.
So how involved was he as in like
Everything.
production?
Tony was completely involved in everything. He used to make this joke where he was going to do a video of himself, you know, sitting at the executive at an executive desk, and then he was going to shoot himself in a meeting with ABC, and then he was going to shoot himself in a meeting with Blake and Marty. Oh, I have to tell you this one story about Blake and Marty that you're going to love. And then he was going to shoot himself on a ladder. Changing a light bulb on the set, and then it was going to be him down there handing him the light bulb. And I always wish that he had done that because he did everything. He held that as his responsibility. And he expected that everyone else do the same. And he taught me so much about ownership and what it means to actually, no matter what your position is or how you are positioned in a show, if you own it in the way that he owned it in every aspect, and that didn't mean that you went into the meetings at ABC or with Blake and Marty and the writers. It wasn't that. It was like you took ownership of what your part was so that all the parts could work. It was all about teamwork. And I think that's partly why we went for so long, because the energy was so good and people could feel that through the show, through the energy of the television. When we first started, there were two things. Blake and Marty came to me. They took me out to lunch at this restaurant at the Universal Hilton Hotel in Universal City. I don't remember the name of the hotel at the time. I'm sure it's probably changed. And we sat down and we had lunch, and I said, oh, I'm so excited. This is so fabulous. And they said, how do you feel about being naked? In one of the first shows, I said, whoa, 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 everybody slow down. And we'll go into that in a minute. And the other thing I talked to them about was I said, listen, you guys, I said, what's really important about this is this woman has to be dressed in a way that will also bring viewers to the show. I said, she is an advertising executive on Madison Avenue. I said, we can't just have her be in this thing or that thing or just, I said, it has to be a definitive, spectacular New York fashion style. And they said, well, gulp, we don't have the money for that. I said, look, you know what? I met with the costume designer at the first year, Lonnie Reynolds, brilliant. I said, here's what we're gonna do. I invited Blake and Marty to lunch in one of the dressing rooms. And I had the whole thing set up with this fabulous catered served lunch with champagne. And I did a fashion show for them. So Lonnie set up everything. And there they sat, and I came out in outfit after outfit. And I said, this is Angela coming home from work. This is Angela on the weekend when she's casual. This is Angela going out of a night in the city. This is Angela dating this guy and going to some gala. This is, and on it went. I don't know, it went on forever. And they were so adorable. And they were so thrilled and so delighted. They said, yes, this is how we want her to look. And I said, well, that means it's going to cost you. They went to the network, and the network gave them the money. And the network at the time, there was a guy there who was our champion, who was a guy named Stu Bloomberg, and Stu was just, and Lou Ehrlich was the head of the network then, and they were just our champions. They really believed in the show, and partly because of the energy and the synergy and the chemistry, and also because of the way it had tested. And so they went and they got the money for us. And the letters that we got about people that were tuning in, and I'm not just talking about women, I'm talking about men, young girls, because they wanted to see Alyssa and the way Alyssa was dressed, and the guys wanted the way Tony was dressed. And there was this way of looking, and Mona, of course, Katherine Hellman, I mean, she has this very voluptuous, gorgeous body, and they put her in these spectacular clothes. So everybody, it wasn't just Angela, it was everybody. And the letters that we got, People are saying, I'm tuning in to see what you're going to wear in the next scene. I'm tuning in to see what you're going to wear in the next show. And so there became this very fashion conscious aspect to the show that was another part of our getting great numbers.
So you mentioned Alyssa Milano. Tell us about working with her.
Oh, love her. Oh my God. 10 years old. Already you knew what a brilliant actress she was. She was so beautiful and vulnerable and sassy and all the qualities that made her this extraordinary talent and person. And just watching her grow up, I mean, we watched them grow up for 8 years. And to see her turn into a young woman and to see her supported by her family the way that she was. I mean, there was a lot that was going on. Those are the years where you're changing tremendously. I mean, they're going through puberty, for God's sake. And this, oh my God, this one story. This is so fabulous. Tony, they wrote a show where Tony takes Alyssa to buy a bra for the first time. And it was so fabulous. The network notes came down that said, you cannot say the word bra. And we're like, seriously, like, really, people can't say bra? They said, no, you can't. And so everybody sat around pondering it. And what they came up with was the phrase foundation garment. So of course it was brilliant and magical. And Tony goes into the store and he's shopping and he says, I'd like to buy my daughter a foundation garment. And the audience just was in hysterics. But something like that can happen, and then something else even better comes out of it. But those scenes between Tony and Alyssa and that kind of beautiful, also chemistry, great chemistry, this tender, beautiful connection. And again, Tony teaching her, and in other ways, her teaching him, and making sure that we did stories that mirrored lives of everybody out in the audience that they would want to see. What it's like for a single dad to be raising a daughter. What's it like to be the person that is bringing up this young woman, and what does it mean that she's starting to go out with boys, and all of those stories that everybody out in the audience can relate to. And Alyssa just did them so beautifully and just so true. And she's just a really special girl, and she still is. And she's just incredible. And now she's a mother. She's a mother. It's astonishing. And of course, I mean, she's a great mother. Not the point. The point is that the years have gone on. You realize how many years it is now.
It's over 30 now, 31
over.
this year, I think.
It's going to be 31 years that we finished in 1992. Yeah.
Tell us about working with Danny Pintaro, who played your son.
Love that boy. Loved everybody on that show. There was a tremendous amount of love. And I don't mean that in some sort of, oh, we all loved each other. It's so great. I mean it in a deeper sense. I mean, we went through a lot together. Tony, let me talk about Jonathan, and then let me tell you something about my relationship with Tony that I think is very important. Jonathan was so little when he first came on the show, and so darling, and he'd just done this big movie, Cujo, with the big dog, and, I mean, he was just so funny and delicious and fragile and just a beautiful, beautiful soul. And then he went through a lot. He really did. And I have such pride in him for his process and how scary it was. I remember he called me when one of the magazines was calling him to tell his people that they found out that he was gay and that they were going to out him. And did he want to do anything about that? And Danny called me, and I spoke to him, and when he came out, he called me, and he called Tony. And Tony was remarkable with him. He said, I'm here for you, buddy. It's great, whatever you need. And Danny said to me, they're calling me, they're going to out me, what do I do? And I said, I think you need to talk to Herb. And because Herb and Jonathan had been on the set the whole time, so they were like family with all of us. And Danny called Herb, and Herb said, you've got to get ahead of this, and you need to do an interview and talk about it. And he did. So brave. At the time, it was not as like it is now. I mean, we still have a long way to go, but it was really much more complicated then. And he did it. And it was, he went through a lot of bullying, name-calling, trauma, and he has come out of it. I just saw him at the opening of Tony's show, Honeymoon in Vegas, married to this wonderful guy, substantive, intelligent. I mean, please, he was a brain. I mean, I think he went to Stanford. I mean, he's just really an extraordinary person. So proud of him. And to that point, all of the relationships changed over time. And I remember there was a period of time when Tony and I knew that part of my job, if not all of my job, was because he was doing everything. Everything. Remember I said before, everybody had to do their utmost and take the responsibility that they could take for the jobs that they had. I got it that my job, part of my job, other than to be there in that character doing all of that, was to be support for Tony. That was my job. And when I got that, you know, so many people say at the end of a show, ugh, could not wait to get away from those people. I hated those people. It's like, enough, get away. We loved each other more at the end of the time than we did in the beginning. And to this day, I say this all the time, that if I ever needed anything, and I called Tony, I could blink and he would be there. Without question. Without my questioning it or his questioning it. And he knows the same is true for me with him. I mean, we just had this lovely email exchange the other day. Just this intimacy of the connection of our friendship is so strong. The bond is so strong. And he knew that I was learning from him. He knew that he was teaching me about comedy in a way that I wouldn't get it anywhere else. And he knew that I was his champion, that I was as there for him as he was for me. And I think that's very rare. And it was unspoken. It was never, wasn't talked about. It was this invisible, unspoken conversation that we both knew and understood. Mm-hmm. And it was as though we had been placed in that place and time. Now this goes back to the fact that if I had not been listening and saying I never want to do a soap opera and I never want to do a sitcom, that magic, that incredible experience would be something that I would have missed, because I was so intent on having it the way that I had to have it, that it wasn't going to be anything different or veer away from what I wanted. And that's a lot of what I want to talk at the end of this about, that I want to say to people, that I want to talk to people about out there, because what you think you want is not what is necessarily needed.
So Tony had come from Taxi, and you guys had another TV vet on your cast, Catherine Hellmond.
Yeah.
Talk about working with her.
Oh, so great. I was in awe of her. First of all, I said, oh my God, we have Katherine Hellman on the show. And after we finished the pilot, she hand wrote notes of thanks to everyone.
Oh, wow.
I mean, she is the person who taught me about being gracious, about being kind, about when there were shows when she didn't always have a lot to do. She was there. It didn't matter 1,000%. I would watch her, and she was committed. And then when she had lots of stuff to do, she was off the charts. She was extraordinary. But remember, this is a woman who started in repertory theater. She started at Trinity Rep. And she had a background in the theater. She had a background in all of this great body of work. And then, of course, she had been on soap. And she was remarkable. And so she was another person that I kept learning from. And we would just sit there and have the most incredible conversations. And she taught me so much just about not misusing your talent. Also taught me a lot about comic timing as well. And then, they wrote a spin-off for her, which was pretty fantastic, and it ended up not getting picked up. And I watched how she dealt with the disappointment of that with such grace. And she was just, I had this one show that we did together on Who's the Boss. It was one storyline about how Angela said, I'm going to be at home and I'm going to do Tony's job, and Tony is going to go out in the world. And it was one of our funniest shows. It was called Harried Housekeeper. And what I remember about that show is the support that Katherine gave to me. I mean, it was all about dealing with my mother. She was at home. The kids were at home. I was having to do breakfast. Things that Angela had no idea how to do. And it was Katherine who just was there in support of me. And there'd be some times where she would say something about the way I was doing something. She said, maybe if you just hit the spatula on this note. And Tony did that all the time, too. I mean, Tony he was unabashed in his giving input. It was like, no, this will make it funnier. And invariably, it would make it funnier. So, another incredible learning experience. I mean, I remember this other show that we did. It was the end of the first season. It was called First Kiss.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting to talk about this because I remember it in my body, that Harried Housekeeper, First Kiss. I remember them. I remember what was happening on the set. I remember when we were rehearsing it and what it was like, and then what it was like in front of the audience, and all the clothes and the hair and the throwing the flower at each other, and then the moment where, and Tony was, I came home drunk from this girls' night out, and just this, Tony carrying me into these rooms and, trying to make sure that I was laying down properly, and he was so careful with me. And he said, no, Ju, I'm going to bang you into the wall because this is going to be funny. And I said, that's okay, just do it. And he always said to me, he always said about me, he said, if she thinks it's funny, it's like if you cut off the arm and she thinks it's funny, it's like, okay, cut it off. And so it's like, I said, yeah, bang me into the wall. I said, that'll be great. And all of that kind of physical comedy I learned from him. And so we were able to do that. And that was very much what First Kiss was about all of that incredible physical comedy.
So that's Tony and Angela's first kiss, the end of season 1.
That's right.
So how did you feel about that character-wise? Because there's always a lot of talk about main characters getting together romantically.
The writers and producers in ABC were so careful. They wanted to give people something because everybody could feel it. I mean, it was in the room. It was the elephant in the room. But they also knew that it was very important not to get them together. So there were teasers all along that were about our relationship. And so that was one of the first ones. Mm-hmm. And so people went crazy. I mean, they loved it. I always thought that if any couple could have gotten together and made it work and kept it sexy and kept it vital and vibrant, we could have done that. I mean, we could have gotten married. We could have had all kinds of fights. We could have had, all things could have changed because we got married. I mean, all of it could have become something else, but they never wanted to do that, and they felt that it was, in terms of longevity and in perpetuity for, when the show got sold, they didn't want it to have an end like that, because then people would stop and they'd say, they got married, oh, never mind. And a lot of people still think to this day that we got married.
So we'll talk about the end of the show in a second, but you had mentioned Angela getting naked.
Yes.
So I wanted to talk about Briefless Encounter.
Oh, you're
was
so good.
The second
Briefless
episode
Encounter.
of the first season.
That was the second
episode?
episode?
Yeah, it was episode 2.
That's right. That's why Blake and Marty talked to me about that at lunch. Another time when Tony was so careful with me. I knew we had to just go for it. And so we just went for it. And I wasn't completely naked, of course. I had a pair of shorts on, but they had to shoot it from different angles, and so it had to be viable. And they told us that the way they were going to shoot it was they were going to shoot me afterwards in pieces, like my stomach, my leg, they were never going to show anything, but they had to have me available to do that. And so we did it, but the propriety with which he treated me told me a lot about him and the way that he would be with me should the series go over time. He treated me like a lady. He was very well trained by his mother. And he was very respectful of me. And I felt very, very safe and very protected. And we were doing it in front of the audience, and some of the pieces of it. And then we shot a bunch of the other stuff later, but he was very careful about it. And also Herb was there, and Herb made sure that, that it was all, that I was well protected and taken care of. And everybody, they treated me with a great deal of deference.
And so the scene was that Tony walked in on Angela as she's coming out of the
Right, and I
bathtub.
was like this, going like this,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like, and then a lot was left to everybody's imagination of what that was. And then, of course, how we had to figure our relationship after that had happened and what that was. And, of course, it was hysterically funny. And they knew it would be hysterically funny. But that was, again, one of those places where they led you on a little bit. They said, oh, wouldn't this be interesting if he catches her in this way and sees her, and then we're left to the imagination of what. And for the rest of the 8 years, he has that picture of me in his head.
So we had read that you actually did a take where you pulled a prank on him.
It actually wasn't a prank.
Okay.
It was more that I just didn't have anything on the top. And I don't actually remember whether we told him or I told him we were going to do it, or he didn't know about it, or the producers were supposed to tell him and nobody informed him, and then we did it, and then he was surprised. I think at some level they didn't realize what a good actor he was and that he could actually do it. But I knew I felt safe with him, and that I could do that, and that he would be respectful of me. And then, of course, years later, he came to see me in the play Wit, and I was completely naked. And so, at the end of that play, which we will talk about, but he was like, after we had dinner after, he said, "Hey, Jew, you look good." But that's the essence of our relationship. Mm-hmm. It's that warmth and kindness and that kind of real connection, like family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Tony and Angela did finally become a couple in that last season, season 8.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't get married, as you said.
No.
So tell us a little bit about the series finale and that final scene.
Can't. It's still as difficult for me today to talk about it as it was in the moment.
Really?
Yeah, it was so interesting because we started the series with me with a towel on my head, opening the door to him, saying to him, you can't. Look, I know my mother sent you. We can't do this. I'm in a bathrobe and I'm in a towel on my head. And they were trying to figure out the end of the season. And when they told us they were going to bookend it with Tony coming back from teaching in Iowa, which is where Tony actually went to school in real life. And I said, oh, God, really? That's going to be really hard to do. And they said, well, we're doing it. And I remember standing at the top of the stairs of the set where I had stood for years, getting ready to come down those stairs. And I thought, oh my God, I'm not going to make it. I don't think I can do this. I came down the stairs. I opened the door. Got the same towel on my head, the bathrobe. There he is. And I had said to him before, I said, I don't think I'm going to make it. He said, you'll be fine, Joe. You'll be fine. I said, it's okay. I mean, that's how he was there for me. I thought, okay. And we do the scene. And he says he's coming back. And what is the line? I say to him, I look at him, he takes me in his arms, and I say, you got the job. And he says, no kidding, or something like that. And then he kisses me. And I just thought, I knew it was time for it to be over. I didn't want it to be over. And it was this, just this beautiful time in my life that ended with the sweetest kiss. It was just, the whole thing was just sealed with this kiss, and it was so many things. I mean, it was just, it was about to be a brand new life for all of us, which is the line in the song about who's boss. So it was going to be altogether new. Nobody knew what it was going to be. And I got another pilot right after that. And I shot it in April. We finished in March, I think, and I shot it in April. This wonderful writer named Gina Winkos called Letting Go with George Siegel. And it didn't get picked up. And I just kind of, we can talk about those other things that happened after that, but that was very singular moment in time, and it's like, it's still in my psyche, still in my body.
And do you guys all still keep in touch? I know you said you do with Tony.
Oh, you know, I haven't talked to Catherine for a while, and I haven't talked to Alyssa for a while. Alyssa and I have some friends in common, and I hear about how she's doing. I think she's a little busy with 2 children now. Thank you very much. And doing Project Runway. She's incredible on. God bless her. Out to here pregnant, looking as gorgeous as ever. Now she's had the baby, second baby. And Danny and I, like I said, just saw each other recently. But Tony and I are the ones that, I mean, he keeps in touch with others, I think, in some ways maybe more than I do. I don't actually know, but he and I are, you know, when he had his book party for his book, and, you know, whenever he's doing something that's really monumental for him. I went out to New Jersey when they were doing Honeymoon in Vegas out there. I got a car and went out and I saw him, and, you know, and then I came to the opening night. You know, I mean, we're there for each other in that way. You know, and when he's been going through some life stuff, I've been there. So.
That's great.
Yeah.
So you also did a number of TV movies and films in the 1990s and 2000s. Just wanted to talk about a couple of those.
I did.
Actually,
I did like 15 or 17 of them, I think.
You did a lot, yeah.
I did.
And actually we'll talk about from 1989, you did the Ryan White story.
I did.
You starred as Jeannie White.
Yeah.
Tell us about how you got involved with that.
My agent at the time, David Eidenberg, fought for me for that role. Because ABC, of course, thought of me as Angela Bauer, as did so many people in the business for such a long time, which will lead us into what happened later with me in the theater. But people were, I mean, everybody said, that blonde waspy girl on Who's the Boss? I don't think so. David said, this woman, and what had happened in the process, as I said to you, what Herb said to me, I can help you do that thing you want to do. So when AIDS hit, and the height of the pandemic was happening in the 80s, and a lot of our friends were dying, particularly my friends in the theater, and nobody knew what was going on. And Herb said, you have to speak up about this. Because what was happening was, it wasn't just that it was AIDS. What was happening in the country was that there were two presidents who never said the word AIDS. What was happening was that there was this level of homophobia in this country that nobody was talking about. And Elizabeth Taylor really spoke out because Rock Hudson was her friend. And Herb said, you got to stand up. And I knew that that was right and true. Just as he had told me I was being so angry in all those auditions. And just like he said, I wasn't getting it because of where I was coming from, he said, I knew he was right. And it was interesting because when I first heard Herb speak, he spoke at this Buckminster Fuller, who was the man who invented the geodesic dome. Bucky was somebody that I knew. And Herb also knew Bucky, and Bucky had this thing called World Game. I know I'm going off on a tangent, I'll get back. And I heard Bucky speak, and that was where I first met Herb, was at this event in New York City at Town Hall. And I met Herb there when Bucky was speaking, when Buckminster Fuller was speaking, and then he said to me, I'm coming back and I'm speaking at Bucky's World Game in a week. And World Game was something like, there's this thing called war games that people do in this country, and they all meet to talk about war and strategies and all that stuff. But Bucky said, we need to do a world game about how the world can work better. What can make the world better? Who can talk about people coming together and doing projects that will actually make the world a different and a better place? And so Herb was speaking there, and he was talking, and I heard this voice in my head. Now, I don't do that, but I heard this voice in my head that said, this is the person you're supposed to be listening to. And I said, oh, really? Okay. And he was talking about relationships and psychological, he was comparing Buckminster Fuller's geometry to psychological relationships. It's fascinating. And so, how did I get on Herb and Bucky? Oh, we were talking about Ryan White. So when Herb speaks, I listen and I take it in and I process it. And things that I would never do or have the courage to do, he gives me the support and the courage to do. So when Herb said, this is important, and I said, okay, I'm scared to do this, but I know it's right. So I've been doing some work, giving some speeches, talking about the gay community and how I was watching the gay community deal with this pandemic that was happening and how our numbers were being decimated. We were going to funerals every week. We were going to the hospitals. We were burying our dead, giving a eulogy, and going back to the hospital because these young men who were gay and had AIDS, if their parents knew they had AIDS, they would disown them, and they were dying alone. And so it was this whirlwind of a time that was so difficult in the country and so problematic in relation to who are the people, who are you going to be? I've been doing a lot of this work, and David Eidenberg, the agent, said to them at ABC, she's already doing this work. She's also an actress, and she can do other parts. Give this to her, and she will make something of it, and the publicity for it, for you, for ABC, and for this pandemic could be exponentially powerful. So they took a chance, and they gave it to me. And I met Ryan, and I met his mother, Jeannie, and we forged a relationship. And all of these things along the way, things that I've done or gotten or come to, have dramatically changed my life and have veered me into a different direction than I thought I was supposed to go. This goes back to that point of, am I listening? Will you take the chance on something that you have no idea what the outcome will be? I only wanted to do justice to Jeannie and to Ryan. And when ABC aired it, it was off the charts. And then they did another version of it where they had me talk about the special tribute, which was after Ryan had passed away. But I will tell you that I got letters from people who said that they would never watch me again because I had done this movie. And that I was supportive of people who had HIV and AIDS, and because I was supportive of the LGBTQ community. And I thought to myself, and people have asked me subsequently, did you think about the possibility that this would damage your life or your career? And I never thought about it. And when I got those letters and I looked at them and I said, good, don't watch me anymore. I don't need your energy. Your bigotry, your prejudice, the way you are in the world is your problem. That's not my problem. And it was one of the things that I used to talk about in the speeches that I would give to the gay community. I would say, you have to realize your being gay is not the issue. Their bigotry is the issue. And it's like, who do you want to be? We'll have this, one life to live, maybe, maybe not, maybe there is such a thing as reincarnation, maybe we do keep coming back, but you got this life now. And I do happen to believe that there is such a thing as reincarnation, but that's another topic. And not in an airy-fairy way. There's this real resonance of, like, when you meet somebody and you say, oh, I know you. You know how you have that with somebody. Anyway, so we have one life to live. This one, okay, we're going to do this one, and we're going to do this one well. Who do you want to be? Who are you going to be? And when I watch the gay community, and I watch them coalesce around caring for each other, creating organizations, opportunities for people, care for people, feeding of people, nurturing of the caretakers, and got no help from anyone, anywhere. Friends were storming the FDA to get the drugs. Terror was everywhere. Nobody knew what was happening. And I watched this community literally rise like the phoenix from the ashes and create itself into some magnificent, glorious community. And I said, that inspires me. I want to be that courageous. So when I got to do the Ryan White story, it gave me that opportunity. And then I could speak more to it. And then I knew that I could in some way help, in whatever small way that I could, to help make a difference in the lives of my friends and people that I didn't even know. So that's when I got involved in things like the California AIDS ride. I would never get my tuchus on a bike and ride from San Francisco to Los Angeles for 7 days and sleep in a tent. That's not me. But my good friend Paul Manette had just died, and I did the ride for him. And then I became involved in the quilt. My friend Dan Pilata had created the AIDS ride. My friend Cleve Jones had created the AIDS Memorial Quilt. And you would go, we did these unfoldings of the quilt in Washington, D.C., at the National Monument. And when the quilt was laid out, you would see parents come to sit by the quilt of their child and weep because they had not had a rapprochement with their child at the end. They had shoved them away and were left with the sorrow and the grief because they had not made their peace in any way. They had not been accepting. They had not understood that their rejection was going to live with them for the rest of their lives. It was an extraordinary time. And so getting to have Jeannie and Ryan on the set was amazing. And then that's when I got to know Elton John, because Elton was impacted on by Ryan in the most profound ways. And to this day, he gives credit to Ryan to turning his life around. This was one very powerful young man, and guided, trained, taught by this extraordinary woman. And I remember being on the set one day, and I've told this story a lot, and you can use it or not, but I remember I got something in a much deeper way. He was on the set, and we were in Statesville, North Carolina, and somebody had come to interview him, and she said to him on the set, so, you know, people were very mean to you in Indiana when you were growing up, and they didn't want you to go to school, and that was the story about him having to move to another school and how they went to court to get him to go to school. And he said, oh yeah. She said, well, what would people do? And he said, well, they would spit at me and call me a fag. And you know how sometimes in your life you hear something and all the pieces that have been in different places just all sort of come together. And I said, this can't be this. My friends, my loved ones, those guys that took care of me when I was 11 years old at Ramblerny in New Hope, Pennsylvania, I have to say what is happening. So I began talking about homophobia. And that was all from starting with Herb and all of the friends and the hospitals and the Project Angel Food, cooking food for people, and hearing Ryan, and all of a sudden saying, wait, and doing the AIDS rides and the quilt and the giving the speeches, and that came into play later in my career, because I was now doing the thing I knew in my heart and soul that I was here to do. And I was here to talk about something much larger, but the platform had come from being known. So that, and had I not done the soap opera, had I not done the sitcom, I would never have had that kind of wide swath of an audience to speak to about these issues. And so later in my career, when Herb said to me, you have to turn around the way people view you, you have to go back to the theater. And we'll get to this later because I know you want to talk about that. I know you want to talk about the movies. But he said, I'll wait and tell you that when we get to the story of Wit.
Sure.
The other movies of the week that I know you wanted to talk about are Too Close to Home.
That's one. Actually, I wanted to mention A Step Toward Tomorrow, which I think was a film
Yes.
that you did with Christopher Reeve.
I did. It was the first thing that he did after his accident.
Yeah.
I knew him before. We had actually done an AIDS benefit together called Heartstrings. He was like nobody. He also came to see me do Wit because they were talking about him maybe directing the HBO special of that at one point in time. Dana was great too, his wife. She was wonderful. He never felt sorry for himself. It was hard. It was a challenge. And we did this movie about this woman who had these two kids, single mom, with a son who was paraplegic. And he goes and talks to Christopher in this movie. If you haven't seen it, you have to see it for Chris. he's luminous in it. And that's the way he always was. And when we were there, we went to the Special Olympics, and he was in the chair, and we got to spend time and stuff like that. And he, we were just talking about what it means to do what you're sent here to do, why you're here, why one chooses to come, why one chooses to do what they do, what they're led to, how they listen. Goes back to that again. He didn't like it. It wasn't anybody's first choice. It wasn't Dana's first choice. It wasn't the family's first choice. But he knew what he had to do. And it is because of him that other people were able to take up the banner of this work and the stem cell work and all of the stuff that his organization does now. And this is a very odd thing to say, but in a way, it had to be him that did that made those first steps, and I use the term purposefully, to make all of this happen. He drew attention to it, and the movie was off the charts because of him.
So you did several other TV movies. You did several other TV series as well in the 90s, some sitcoms. One we wanted to just touch on was The Stones.
Loved it.
Tell us a little bit about that.
I loved it. Oh, I thought that could have been so great. Robert Klein, Barbara Barry, Jay Baruchel, Lindsay Sloan, like fabulous people. Max Munchak, David Cohan, Genji Cohen. And it's one of those things that has all the right elements. Story about a couple who are divorcing and don't have enough money to not live in the same house, and all live in the same house, and everybody lives in the same house, and craziness ensues. I remember, and I knew Max from all the LGBT work I was doing. I don't think they thought that I could do this part. I mean, that was a lot of what I came up against after Who's the Boss was over, because people thought of me as the girl who was on the soap opera and the girl who was on Who's the Boss. So I went in to do the audition for them. I remember it was on the Radford lot. I went upstairs. I did the audition. I finished. Max said, oh my God, we're taking you to the network. I was like, okay, great. I really wanted it. Then I went to the network with Robert Klein, and Robert Klein and I have a lot of chemistry together, and it was really great. And we subsequently ended up doing a movie later that Jennifer Westfeldt wrote called Iron Abbey, this darling movie that, quite frankly, I think not enough people have seen. It is so delicious. It's like a Woody Allen New York story. It's fabulous. Anyway, so we did this pilot, and we had such a good time. And it was really, you could see that the team was great, but somehow it just wasn't, I don't know whether it wasn't meshing or, I don't even know what happened, but we shot 10 of them, I think. You probably know better than I do. I don't remember how many we shot, but they only aired 3.
Yeah.
It was so disappointing. And then, of course, as we know, I mean, Max and David were already Max and David, but as we know, Genji has become Genji. And just recently, I saw her. And, I'm doing this new series, Transparent, and we were all invited to the AFI, the American Film Institute luncheon, which is a huge honor. And she and Jill Soloway, who is the creator of Transparent, are very good friends. And I got to see her, and we got to talk again. And it was just like, I remembered how much I loved her and how much I respected her. And I still do. And look at what she's doing. I mean, she's just Weeds and Orange is the New Black. And she's just this amazing writer, producer, genius. She's just, and such a delicious person. So that was great. It was great. And it was sad that it went away. And it was funny because Barbara Barry had played my mother she played my mother in The Stones, and she had also played my mother in that just the pilot that we made with George Siegel of Letting Go. She's great.
And then starting in 2002, you had a recurring role on Law & Order SVU as Elizabeth Donnelly.
That's right. And the way I got that was because, I'll just take you back a step.
Sure.
Because I had, for the longest time, I was doing a lot of television. I did another TV movie that was a very powerful TV movie in 1992 when we finished with Who's the Boss. It was called Men Don't Tell. And that movie was about a woman who was psychologically and physically abusing her husband. And it came from police transcript records in therapy sessions of guys who were being abused by their female partners or wives that nobody was talking about, and these guys weren't talking about it. And we got the statistics on it that it was 50% men to women and 50% women to men. And so these people wrote this script about it, and it was very difficult to do and very complicated. And a lot of people had a lot of difficulty with it, but when we started talking about the statistics or how women were felt so put upon and had either little education or no way to talk about their frustration, and the guys had no way to talk about it because here they are, these big burly guys, and they are embarrassed and they can't talk about it, and they're also physically, they can't do anything in retaliation. So it was a very complicated story, and I did it with Peter Strauss, and he was genius, and it was really this important movie and has come to be now sort of this way in, an educational tool to talk to people about both sides of the issue. And so I had done that movie, and then I had done these other movies, Too Close to Home and Murder at My Door with Johnny Galecki, about a young boy who is a serial killer and how his parents discover it and find out. I mean, these really important films with these very different characters, and that was what was so interesting to me about them. I was getting to do all these different women, and it was like being in repertory theater again. And then Herb actually created a series for me called The Simple Life. That was on CBS, pilot in 6 episodes, so it was 7 episodes. And unfortunately, it didn't go anywhere. And again, not clear exactly why, because it had a lot of potential. It was about this woman, me, who was a Martha Stewart wannabe. Not somebody who put Martha Stewart down, but thought Martha Stewart was the goddess of the world. And it was very cute and darling. And so I did that. And then there were a couple of other things that were happening, and that didn't go. And things weren't happening. I was back in somewhat of that place that I was talking about earlier, where I was going, what's going on? Why is this happening? Why are these things not working out? So then Herb has the big idea that it's important, and of course the brilliant idea, that it's important that I change the way I'm being viewed. And he said, you have to go back to the theater. So I was asked to audition for a play called If Memory Serves, written by my now friend, Jonathan Tollins, the brilliant playwright who wrote Buyer and Seller, that my friend Michael Urie started, from Ugly Betty. And the story was this play about an aging sitcom star. And I said to her, this is a very bad part for me. This is not a good part for me. I will not be good in this, and I shouldn't be doing this, and I shouldn't be going up for this. He said, it's the perfect part for you. I said, well, good for you. I'm glad you think so. And I went away to a ladies' yoga camp in Espanola, New Mexico. And I was doing Kundalini yoga for 2 weeks and meditating. And I got this thing in my head that said, this is the right thing for you to go up for. He's absolutely right. Because he said to me, you're terrified again. I said, you're right, I'm terrified. I called him up from the ladies' camp and I said, I'll go in for it. And he said, well, too bad, because they already cast it. And I was like, oh, missed opportunity. I come back. I sit down with Herb and Jonathan and I say, this isn't going well. This is not good. I'm not being the person that I know I want to be. I'm going around to all these LGBTQ groups and saying, you inspire me, look at you, look at what you've done, the way you have turned yourselves inside out to become different people. And I'm just talking the talk, but I'm not walking the walk. I'm not courageous. I'm not, they're inspiring me, but I'm not inspiring anybody. I'm talking about it, but I'm not doing anything. I said, I don't like myself. I don't like who I'm being. Which has always been, not always, but since I've been working with Herb, a different kind of context for me was the context of my life. And whatever went into the content, it's like I talk about like a glass that's the context, is the glass. Anything can go in that glass. Water, iced tea, iced coffee, lemonade. The content is almost in many instances irrelevant. It's the context, where one comes from. And my context was all about my career. What am I going to have? Oh, what's the next thing going to be? Is this going to make me a star? Is that going to make me fabulous? What's going to do? Is somebody going to notice me? And I stopped all of that and I said, my life has to be more important. That has to be the context. Who I am as a human being. All of my neuroses, all of them, whatever they are, that can't be the top note. The top note has to be something else, bigger, more powerful for this life. How do I go through the world? How do I treat other people? And so I said, okay, the next thing, you are such a good listener. Thank you.
You're easy to listen to.
You're so great. And I said, all right, the next thing that comes up for me to listen, the next thing that comes up for me to go up for, I will go up for. Whatever it is. So along comes Mr. Bernie Chelsea, and Bobby Lupone, and Will Cantler, and Daryl Roth, the fabulous Broadway producer who is now one of my closest friends. They all are. I'm now on the board of MCC Theater, which is Bernie and Bobby and Will and those guys, it's their theater. Bernie remembered me from One Life to Live. No, Daryl, I think, remembered me from Who's the Boss. But there was a combination of remembering from the two things I swore I would never do. It's the magic, it's the divine choreography, it's the listening. And I said, okay. They said, Bernie called the agent and said, we want you to come in to audition for this play called Wit. And Kathleen Chalfant is leaving, and she's taking a vacation before she's going to London to do the play in London. And so, do we need to,
No.
Are we good? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah? Okay. Sorry. And so they said, we want you to fly to New York. I had to fly myself to New York. And I was also doing an AIDS benefit for my friend Mary Fisher at the same time. And so I said, okay, great. I'll go into New York. I'll audition. They're never going to give me this. They're never going to give me this. It's like, okay. Here I am, I can be a big person, I'll go to New York, I'll audition for this. And I really worked on it. And I went into the room, and it was really funny because about a year before, Herb had given me an article from the New York Times about Wit. And he said, this we must see when we're in New York. Well, we kept missing it because they had taken it from MCC and they were moving it to the Union Square Theater. And so it wasn't available, so we kept missing it, so we never saw it. And I went into the room and I auditioned for them. And I finished, and they looked at me and they said, when did you see the play? And I said, haven't seen the play yet. I said, we just sort of missed. And they said, so how did you know what to do? And I worked on it, and I think the play is genius. And I remember reading the play when they first sent it to me, and I read it, and I was so, I couldn't stop reading it. I mean, Margaret Edson is a genius. I mean, she won the Pulitzer Prize. She's written this one play, and it's, so I read it, and I'm weeping at the end. I just can't believe how brilliant this is. And at the end of the play, I don't know if you ever saw the play, but she takes off one hospital gown, and then she takes off another hospital gown, and she takes off the hospital band, and she takes off her red cap, and it says, and she is standing there bald and naked and beautiful in the light. I close the script, and I go, she is what? And beautiful in the light? And I went, yep, it says naked. And I'm like, oh no, we're not doing naked. And also I had all this stuff about my hair, and I was like, oh my God. And in the contract it says you have to shave your head and you have to be naked. So my agent at the time said to me, she said, well, you can wear a bodysuit. And Herb said, she's not gonna wear a bodysuit. She's gonna go, if she's gonna do this, she's gonna do this. And Herb said, this could be the thing that can really turn around the way people view you. And to some degree it did. But, and of course, they said to me, you can't do it in New York unless you do it on the road. So they gave me the part. And I thought, oh my God, now what am I gonna do? And it took me 2 hours on the phone. Herb in Colorado, me in LA. I knew there was a yes underneath all of that. But all I could hear was no. I can't do this. I can't do it in New York for 6 months. I haven't been on stage in 22 years. I'm going to be facing the New York critics. I can't be naked. I can't be bald. Then I have to go on tour with this and go to Boston and Florida and California and be bald for almost a year. I said, I don't think I can do this. And I had all these considerations, and he just kept saying, okay, all right. And finally I just looked at myself and I said, if I were on my deathbed and I looked back and I said, why was I too scared? Why was I not being courageous the way I talk about the gay community? Why was I being this person I don't want to be? And I said yes. And again, it's the Robert Frost poem, and I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And so it wasn't like all of a sudden everybody said, oh my goodness, she can really act. I mean, now people come back and say, oh my God, I saw you in Wit, and it was incredible. And of course I was following the footsteps of Kathy Chalfant, who was just brilliant and amazing. And at that time, Derek Anson Jones was quite ill. And it was very hard for him to direct me and put me into the play, so I only had about 10 days of rehearsal to go in, and he had help from his friend Leah Gardner, who was at Yale with him, and she has now become this extraordinarily famous director. And but Leah and Derek sort of put me together into the play, and I never will forget opening night, because Bernie and Bobby and all of them at MCC, because I don't read reviews, and they said, no, this review you have to read. And then and that was the New York Times, and then there were other reviews that came out. One of them in particular I remember said, well, she wouldn't be your first or your 500th choice, but oh my. And it was stuff like that kept happening, that people were going. And then I think people in the theater community here knew at some level that I was serious about the work. And then I came back and I did another play. For Ethel Fugard, I did a play called Sorrows and Rejoicings, which was his first post-apartheid play, which was directed by him at Second Stage for my friend Carol Rothman. And then I came back and I did another play for MCC. For Bernie and Bobby and Will and Blake, and it was called Colder Than Here. And I did it with Sarah Paulson and Lily Rabe and Brian Murray. And I think people were getting the idea that I was more serious. But it was during this time, after Wit, that they saw me in Wit, the casting directors and my friend Ted Kotcheff, the producer, and my friend Neil Baird, the executive producer, saw me in Wit. And that's how I got Elizabeth Donnelly.
we will tell that story on the next tape. We'll take
Okay.
a short break.